two, 1, 2, 3.
Hello and welcome to Ithaca DSA Presents. I'm Teresa Alt. I'm technically the host today, but really I'm a participant observer. I am, of course, a member of Ithaca DSA. As such, we frequently get messages from the Ithaca Tenants Union asking us to spread the word about their actions. Although I am a housing activist, as by now the audience well knows, I am not allowed to be a member of the Tenants Union because I am not a tenant. However, I am a liaison between DSA and the Ithaca Tenants Union, and therefore I am on some of their lists. More than a week ago, I heard from the Tenants Union by email that they were facing a very sad story. Ithaca Neighborhood Housing Services, usually called INHS, provider of quality, inexpensive housing to many low-income people, was going to evict an elderly, disabled tenant. The Tenants Union was going to blockade the eviction. However, the Tenants Union did some due diligence and spoke with the tenant. They learned that he did not want to stay in the apartment, but he had been unable to find another place to live. The Tenants Union thinks that INHS has many properties, many out in the country, where he could live and would be happier. The Tenants Union also spoke with the neighbors in the building and learned that the neighbors wanted to be rid of this tenant and his apparently noisy and abusive friends. I joined the training and learned that the plan was not to stop the eviction, but rather to witness it, to ensure that there would not be police violence. I said I would come with a camera borrowed from the public access studio. There was agreement that the very presence of a visible camera would put everyone on their best behavior. They were saying that evictions are usually done at about 9 a.m. when the assisting marshals and locksmiths are available to help out the sheriff's deputies. Throughout this account, we will refer to the tenant being evicted as Michael. Rest assured that this is not his name, and so don't try to figure out which Michael it is. I interviewed Sarah Curless, one of the Tenants Union members, who was most active in making contact with Michael and his neighbors, and who was present on the first day when an eviction was possible, when I too came with the camera.
Hello, my name is Sarah Curless, and I'm an Ithaca Tenants Union member. So the case of the eviction of Michael first became known to us when other Ithaca Tenants Union members went to eviction court on August 26th and met Michael on his way out of court, having just been handed down a case of eviction and for being a few minutes late to the courthouse. His eviction is what is called a non-renewal eviction. Basically, his landlord, Ithaca Neighborhood Housing Services, decided that they were not going to renew his lease. He did not have anywhere else to go, and asked more than 4 months in advance if they were going to renew his lease or not, but only told him about a month before his lease was up that they were not going to renew it. So he continued to live there, and then the 2 days or so between the two eviction moratoriums in New York State, they brought him to eviction court, and the judge said that he would be evicted. So after that, myself and another Ithaca Tenants Union member went and visited Michael at his apartment and learned about the facts of the case, and just finding out that he had various disabilities such as Tourette's syndrome, schizophrenia, other mental health illnesses, and an eye condition that made it very difficult for him to see. On top of those mental health conditions, it made it very difficult for him to get to court and to deal with all of these documents that he was getting, including Section 8 benefits. So it was difficult for him. He also was providing some housing for friends who were housing insecure, and Ithaca Neighborhood Housing Services, which I'll call INHS, wanted him to leave for that reason as well. So we talked with him about that. We, the Ithaca Tenants Union, I'll call them ITU from here on out, decided that we would write a public letter as well as a private letter to INHS. And so that was written and edited by ITU, emailed to INHS, and published on the ITU Facebook page and Mutual Aid Tompkins page. There was no word back from INHS at all, besides having them, have some employees, current and previous employees, write just nice things about INHS, which ITU pointed out it was possible, that they've done great things for the community, and it probably was true, but in this case, they were in the wrong. And so that we didn't get any communication from them in either way of what they were going to do about the eviction. And then on September 17th, a Friday, we went to go, myself and another ITU member, went to talk to Michael again, and we found out that he'd been served an eviction warrant on the 9th. But because of his physical and mental health disabilities, he did not see it until the 16th. And the eviction warrant is served 14 days before the eviction happens. So we decided on Tuesday that we would go and speak with INHS, and yeah, so we planned that. We reached out to local clergy and community leaders, didn't hear anything back, so ITU went to meet with INHS. They were very upset about that, so they called the police and said that we needed to leave their property, including the parking lot that we were in. And so we left and planned to have an eviction blockade on Thursday. We later found out that Michael was having issues with the other tenants in the building. So he, and I guess particularly the people he was letting stay with him, were making a lot of noise and threatening other tenants, especially along racial lines. So we decided that we would not stop the eviction from happening, since he clearly needed to leave that housing situation, but our new demands were for him for INHS to find him another place to live instead of making him houseless. So those demands were ignored by INHS again, and so ITU members stood outside of his apartment building on the day that he was supposed to be evicted, from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m., and that didn't happen. That happened the next day instead. Yes, so that was September 23rd, so 2 weeks, 14 days after they said that they served the eviction warrant. So the building has a main entrance, and you go up some steep stairs, and then there are 3 units sort of just set up in a triangle at the top of the stairs. Right, all the doors are right next to each other. And And I think that the walls are very thin there, which leads to a lot of noise complaints from other tenants, just because everything can be heard in all of the other units. And this leads to some understandable animosity. But I mean, the main issue is that we wanted him to go somewhere else also, but not be homeless. So through talking with Michael for this case, we found out that Michael also wanted to leave Ithaca City. He wanted to be somewhere quieter, and he just was worried about all of the negative influences that he perceived around him being in the city, so he wanted to be somewhere where there were fewer people. And so we wanted to encourage INHS to give him a place that was outside of Ithaca city limits, as they have housing in other areas around, including Watkins Glen, smaller towns and cities in the area where he would have preferred to live anyway. But we have not heard anything back from INHS about this, and we plan to continue speaking with them about this in the future. So on Thursday, September 23rd, when several Ithaca Tenants Union members, at most 10 people, were outside of the building trying to prevent this eviction starting at 8:30 in the morning. It was pouring that day, so people were standing outside with homemade signs that got drenched, holding umbrellas, wearing rain jackets, trying to show people on the street what we were doing, and just draw attention to this unjust eviction that was supposed to take place that day. A pop-up tent had to be acquired because it was raining so profusely, and everyone was drenched. A lot of the signs and things were ruined, but people persisted. It was eventually decided that everyone should leave, take a hot shower, regroup, and that there would be 2 people standing guard in case an eviction did take place later in the day. So they stayed in cars to stay warm and dry, and just keep an eye on the building, as well as the fact that a neighboring businesswoman was very upset that we were outside of her business. So we had to move out of the way for that as well.
So I showed up at the building with my borrowed camera and tripod at 8:30 that Thursday morning, September 23rd. About 8 people from the Tenants Union and DSA showed up too. Soon it began to rain, softly at first. Then it rained harder and harder. Nothing was happening. We were wondering whether the eviction warrant was valid only for that day or also for any day after that. Genevieve Rand showed up with a tent and wonderful food, but it was getting harder and harder to keep the equipment dry even under the tent. At something like 11:30, Taylor took me to his car where I wiped off the equipment. We waited and watched, and nothing was happening. Finally, around noon, he drove me home. Others remained in cars to watch from their cars. Let's let Sarah resume her story.
So that was a Thursday. The next day, the 24th, of Friday, they evicted him at around 9:35 in the morning. And it happened, no one was really notified. Some community members notified ITU that this was happening, and so people showed up on the scene to film it, but it was over within 10 minutes. So this is a message from Taylor, another ITU member, saying, "I went to look at the situation outside of Michael's apartment at 9:25 a.m., no sign of anything. I got a message from Angel, again another ITU member, at 9:35 a.m. that it was happening and got there probably by 9:40 a.m. there was an Ithaca Police Department vehicle, canine, though I never saw the dog, and the officer wasn't visible. Woman who I assume is from INHS was outside, who we now know as Kara Pendergast, the program manager, and so he called Angel because I thought it was a false alarm since it wasn't Tompkins County Sheriff's Department, who we thought was going to carry out the eviction. But when I finished, the cop came out of the building, waited for a few minutes out there with the woman, and Michael came down the stairs. They briefly spoke to him, and he abandoned his belongings on the corner. So there was not a lot that was able to be filmed, but there were some pictures that were taken of Kara Pendergast, who is a housing manager at INHS, especially for Ithaca properties. She was seen entering and exiting the building a few times that morning. So, yeah, and Ithaca Police Department were the ones to help evict Michael. He only had one bin of his belongings that was left on the curb, and so ITU is trying to connect him back with those because Michael doesn't have a cell phone. Often he is really difficult to reach, and so he has not been heard from since Friday the 24th. At this point, we still hope to work with INHS to demand that they find him a new place to live, but that is still in the works. So this was the first legal eviction that has happened since the pandemic started, and since the Ithaca Tenants Union started, which was around the same time, March 2020. There's been an eviction moratorium since then, for the most part, and so there has been no other legal evictions. The 2 days that the court was able to do evictions, there were a lot of people there, but all of the evictions were able to be called off instead of actually happening. That means that during these moratoriums, there have been illegal evictions that have taken place and have also been prevented as well. So an illegal eviction is when a landlord decides, for reasons that you're not allowed to, based on race, age, creed, sexual orientation, gender, and any other prejudices, that they want you to leave, but they don't have any documents from the court that say that you have to be evicted. So they just decide to make your housing unlivable, or they will change the locks, threaten you, and those are illegal evictions. Those are not supported by the courts or police at all. So some things the Ithaca Tenants Union has learned from doing this eviction is to have more durable equipment in case of bad weather, including signage, having tents from the beginning to keep everyone warm and dry. I think also there have been some issues around communication, just because we have several different ways of communicating, and that it needs to be condensed, as well as having a rotating group of people in charge of communicating all the information to all of the members. Because there were some people left in the dark, which we don't want to happen again.
Yes, the tenants union learned some lessons. They need to get a better understanding of all the different possibilities in evictions. For instance, that it can be done by the city police as well as the sheriff's department, and the first day is not necessarily the only one for an eviction. It's great if an organization has different channels and lists for different purposes, but if you've alerted everybody to something happening, then you have to be sure to let them all know when it isn't happening or when it happens at a different time. Although I'll have to admit that I could never have gotten there on Friday, even if I had been alerted, because my equipment was still disassembled and scattered throughout my house to dry out. The tenants union needs some very visible, generic housing signs on plastic or laminated cardboard, signs that can be used at many actions and in all kinds of Ithaca weather.
We learned also from this case that there is another unit in the building that was threatened with eviction as well before Michael got his eviction warrant. So it does leave the Ithaca Tenants Union to wonder what INHS is really doing when they say they want to keep lower and moderate income people housed in the city and in the outside of the city. From talking to other tenants, they did not feel totally supported by INHS, but they did not have a lot of love for each other either, and leading us to demand that Michael be moved to another place to live. We are hoping to fight for a right to counsel for people who are sent to eviction court, just because if Michael, had someone representing him who actually knew all of these housing laws and what his rights were, then maybe, if he was a few minutes late to court, he wouldn't have been automatically evicted just for being late because of his different disabilities due to past traumas and disorders that he has. We're also, the Ithaca Tenants Union is pushing for a right to renew law, which would have made this eviction unlawful anyway. Or at least having the tenant have some input on if the lease is renewed or not, instead of the landlord deciding completely if a lease will be renewed or not, and asking tenants a month or so into their lease if they would like to renew for the next year. We're trying to give time frames that will actually work for people, and that will support people to stay in housing.
Right to counsel legislation has been introduced into Ithaca City Common Council. At present, nearly all landlords who seek evictions are represented by lawyers locally and nationally. Hardly any tenants have legal representation. Naturally, the landlords usually win. Having legal representation is known statistically to make a huge difference. It probably would have made a big difference in this case. A good attorney could probably have made sure that the client was able to get to court on time, so he wouldn't have forfeited his case. A good attorney probably would have known how to handle the case even in the absence of the client. A tenant's lawyer doesn't always mean that the landlord loses, but it often means that there will be negotiation for something the tenant needs, like extra time to find another place, or in a case like this one, where the landlord is a major housing provider, one could imagine that a lawyer could have persuaded them to provide alternative housing. I don't think, though, that there is much supportive housing right now available for really problematic tenants, but a lot is being built. The big building on Meadow Street, not far from Ithaca Bakery. The brightly colored art house on Cherry Street, near the flood control channel. Asteri, by the Vicino Company, will have a number of supportive units. That's being built where the Green Street parking garage has been demolished. These all will have staff on hand to help tenants with behavioral problems learn to behave. There is also right to renew legislation before council. But this would have been less relevant in this case. Michael's behavior likely would have made him ineligible to renew, and after all, he did not want to renew. But it will bring salvation to many tenants whose only problem is that they lack money. And it will probably save many young people from being forced to commit to renewing or leaving nearly a year in advance of the end of their lease. And right to renew legislation can forbid unreasonable rent raises for a renewing tenant, even though it can't keep the landlord from raising the rent sky high for the next tenant willing to take it. On the other hand, if the city can be persuaded to opt in to the Emergency Tenant Protection Act, that will hold rents to reasonable raises even for new tenants, but only in certain older and larger buildings. So the two pieces of legislation are complementary. Finally, you may not be having acute problems, but if you want to know more about your rights as a tenant, you can reach out to the Ithaca Tenants Union. Their website is ithacatu.org. That's ithacatu.org. They are a member organization, and there's a form on the website for joining. They also have a free hotline for tenants. It's 607-301-1560. You can be referred to a free law student backed by an attorney, or you can talk to the volunteer who does intake and may refer you to other resources. That's 607-301-1560. This has been Ithaca DSA Presents. I have been talking with Sarah Curless of the Ithaca Tenants Union about a recent eviction case in Ithaca. I'm Teresa Alt. Thanks for watching.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3.